civil service, very much like William. Unfortunately, I was the one looking at all the IDS and firewall alerts that all the customers he bought us. I was also head of security at Cable and Wireless, so I can sympathise with what Philippe was saying there about telcos and unpatched systems. I can verify that that really is the case. Trying to get them to patch their back-end core infrastructure is very, very difficult. My last job with a vendor was actually with Symantec again, where I was head of governance, risk and compliance, looking after their internal network. So I've got quite a bit of experience from the technology side, actually trying to defend networks and look after big corporate environments and all the problems that poses. I don't know if you're in that kind of situation, but it's a very difficult place to be. My current role at Netwitness, I'm more on the sales side of things, but also kind of evangelising about how people should be changing their security. I'm quite lucky and fortunate in that I travel quite a lot, a hell of a lot. And I meet lots and lots of different security teams from everybody from government, intelligence, telcos, financial sector, and everybody in between. But the thing that I come across all the time is that these technology or these security teams, some good, some bad, all face the same problem. They haven't got the tools required to really face the advanced threats that they're facing at the moment. So, even the teams that have really got it nailed, they've got IDS, and they've got firewalls, they've got SIM, are still failing in their job and still being victims of attacks. So, this presentation is to kind of go through and find out why that is and what maybe you can do to kind of address that going forward, and basically why security sucks in its current state. So does anybody know who these guys are? So fear, uncertainty and doubt. So as William mentioned earlier on in his opening address, that a lot of security tools are sold on this. And in some ways I think that's actually a good thing, because people aren't aware. A lot of the people I meet are not aware of what threats they're facing. No matter how much things like Aurora get into the news, people aren't aware of it. So those people do need to wake up. But as a security team, you really shouldn't have fear, uncertainty and doubt. You should have an awareness and be wary of your attackers. A little bit of uncertainty, but only in what their next attack vector may be. That's the only thing. But you certainly shouldn't have any doubt at all as to what's happening on your network. You should be totally aware of everything that's going on and actually looking through that traffic and looking at what's happening. So if there are any compromises, you should be aware of it. So we recently had some studies done by the Conan Institute and the 541 group. 83% of respondents said that they believe they've been victims of some kind of advanced persistent threat attack on their network. And 44% believe that was an ongoing problem, and they would be a victim again. 79% of those said that it was difficult or almost impossible to detect and stop those attacks, and 91% believe that their IDS and AV was blind to those attacks. And from my experience and what I've seen, I totally agree with that. These really advanced threats, 0 days, they're not going to be detected by those technologies. And 50% believe there's actually been, or there's been some data loss due to those attacks. So that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier on about whether we disclose things, these problems that we face currently. So I want to talk a little bit about the ecosystem of security. So back in the big bad days, a long time ago, we had big vendors and we had adversaries. And certainly back in the time when I was working in a sort of managed security environment, the only thing we were looking out for was the next worm outbreak and the next big problem. And it just seemed to be, there was no real malicious intent in it, it was just a problem that was ongoing. And that's what the big vendors were trying to address. But I think now people are starting to wake up, and actually these adversaries are getting further and further ahead of the bigger vendors, and the bigger vendors are falling behind. That gap is widening. So what we're now starting to see is point solutions coming in to address the specific threats that we're seeing in that ecosystem. So lots and lots of new small vendors springing up and start to address those point areas, and yet again the adversaries are getting further and further ahead of those solutions. As that goes on, some of those smaller vendors get swallowed up by the bigger vendors, more point solutions come along, but where we really need to get to is ahead of this curve, if we like, get ahead of the game, so we can actually attack the attackers head on. Then all of a sudden, out of left field came regulatory compliance. Now, some people see this as a good thing. Security teams are getting more budget to spend on this. But in my view, a lot of this regulatory compliance is actually diverting the attention away from the true security threats and away to things like PCI and Sarbanes-Oxley. And then, yet again, a whole load of new vendors or new services spring up around that to address those specific point problems. Now, just because you've actually attained your PCI compliance and prove there's no risky services running on a group of servers and there's no credit card numbers in the clear, that doesn't mean that your network is secure. And that's the key thing, that budget and time and resources being diverted for security practice, but they should be concentrating on actually looking at the network and finding out what's really going on. So, there's no end of headlines about the latest things that have been going on. I'd like to ask a question, who here thinks that they've actually got security nailed within their organisation and they've got some hot shit security team and they know exactly what's going on? Nobody. That's good. Because if people like Google, Yahoo, and Adobe can't do it, then who's to say that you guys can do it? It's a very difficult problem. And if somebody really wants to get into your network, you can have all the IDS, IPS, and SIM solutions you want, okay? They're still going to get in there. Unless you get rid of all your users and discount from the internet. So prevention is a failing strategy. Risk management. So risk management sucks as well. So who here is doing vulnerability scans and counting all those vulnerabilities and then sending off reports to guys to go and patch all those systems? Okay, how can you patch against things that you don't know about, and zero-day attacks and zero-day flaws in software? You only got to look at some of the recent attacks that have been out there. Here we have one last week, the week before. Okay, just running rampant across networks. If you look at the Stuxnet worm that was going around, that was using 4 separate zero-day vulnerabilities to attack SCADA networks. Okay, that's going to be a very hard thing to patch against, if not possible. The rise of social networking, mobility, and people using those applications and within enterprises, again, making it very, very difficult to secure. That's before we even get into cloud computing. People are just outsourcing and divesting their responsibility by saying, well, just put it all in the cloud and let somebody else look after it. Who's to say that those cloud organizations aren't any better at securing your data than you are? So, who really owns you? Who are you up against? So, 2 sort of main areas really. You look at cyber criminal groups and gangs. Motivation can be high, primarily for financial gain. There can be a lot of money involved in this. Can be linked to state policy, if you like. There's also the cyber criminal, state-sponsored activists as well. So again, very much linked to state policy, very highly motivated and very highly skilled as well. So let's change our job for a day, actually. Instead of being this in a security role for an enterprise, that's a real sucky job. Let's actually be a CIO of a criminal group for the day. And how could that be better? Well, you get to play with all the latest design and malware. You get to play with all the latest hacks and tools, covert channels, etc. Very low risk. And you get to use all the latest tools. What might this organisation look like? So, if you want to be the CIO of this criminal hacking group, you can be just like any other CIO. You can actually start to outsource some of these roles that you need. And I'm not going to say you can go to EDS or CSC and get this type of work done for you, but there's various groups out there that you can use to do all of this work for you. So you can actually hire some malware writers and buy all these zero-day exploits. You can rent a botnet to deliver these attacks and these services. You can actually go out there and hire identity collectors to actually bring in that information that you need. Money mules to actually launder the cash. And then basically you just sit at the end of it and reap the rewards and take in the clean money and the cash. And these actual groups exist. There's lots of talk about different crews out there in different countries. There's a lot of money involved in this business. But unfortunately, we don't have that job. At least I hope none of you do. So we're just back to being our usual CISO of an enterprise. But this is a really difficult job, so maybe we could go and hide in the government and take up a role there instead. But even the government have problems as well. So even these very large organisations, there can be very specific targets for attacks. Okay, so people are not just sending spam and just trying to infect anybody. There can be very, very targeted attacks against specific individuals within companies. And in fact, in one of my previous roles, we had a targeted attack against the CEO of that company, and it was successful, and his machine was compromised. And then actually when we went through it, we found out they'd actually compromised somebody else's machine in the network, and then used that as a leapfrog to send him emails and compromise his machine as well. So why are security teams failing? So primarily people. A lot of security teams I go and visit, they have guys in that role who maybe just inherited and come from a networking background, and then they suddenly end up looking after the firewall or the IDS, or they've got some kind of interest in security. But look at who you're up against. These very, very advanced adversaries. They've got a lot of resources they can throw at this task, and they're very, very skilled. Whereas if you've only got one or two guys who know a little bit about IDS and maybe how to configure a firewall, then you're not much of a group to go up against them. So people need to really look at investing in their security teams, training them, and actually hiring better trained people. The process, the monitoring of networks, just throwing all your logs into a SIM and then waiting for a correlated event to pop up is not going to tell you when you've been hacked. Or certainly not catch the advanced threats. You may find out some worms and things like that. They're easy to find stuff, but that's all. And finally, the technology. So current infrastructures that people got in place, signature-based, AV, IDS, IPS, DLP, firewalls, UTM devices. Same old technology that's been around for the last 10 or 15 years, okay? And they just cannot keep up with the signatures. So I actually saw a quote recently from a SIM vendor saying, if it wasn't logged, it didn't happen. Bullshit. That's a ridiculous statement to make. It may not be logged because it's a new attack that nobody's seen before. In fact, invariably that's what happens. So this is a really good slide I picked up the other day. It's available on the NERD site. And this is kind of a timeline that they've put together of the likely attack scenarios. And I'd actually like to say that this is probably the best case scenario. That we've got the attacker here doing surveillance, target analysis, probing the network, and then actually formulating his attack plan of how he's going to gain access to the systems, and then he's actually launching his attack. And immediately he actually gets a foothold into the network and starts to cover his tracks. Okay, clearing up the log files, patching the system so nobody else can take over it, looking for it to leapfrog into other machines within the network. And then his cover-up's complete, and then he maintains his foothold, data exfiltration, etc. And then on the bottom map, you've got the actual defender's timeline. So they're doing their physical security checks, their threat analysis, scanning the network, finding out what vulnerabilities they've got, etc., putting monitoring controls in place. And if you're lucky, they may have actually identified this attack, and then they go into their incident reporting and containment process, etc. But invariably, from what I've seen, this doesn't happen. A lot of the time, these attacks are just going on behind the scenes for months on end, and they're actually not aware of what's happening. And a lot of the time, people actually trip over the fact that the machine is compromised, rather than detecting that compromise taking place. So anybody who is a regular visitor to SANS IRC, be familiar with this kind of post. This is one just from last week. I drug out straight away. Yet another exploit of the application layer on Adobe, and these kind of things are coming out all the time. But the fact that we just make a blasé statement of take a bit of time for the antivirus IDS folks to release a signature for this, so keep an eye out. These guys, as security professionals, we're fighting this problem every day. Even when something gets released, how do we know that this vulnerability wasn't there or known about by people for the last X number of months? And they've been in and out of our systems without us having any way of detecting that. So again, security sucks and security technologies have failed. Here's another survey we had done where we went and asked a load of security guys and CIOs whether they thought compliance would actually help them improve security on their network. And interestingly, the CIOs strongly agree that compliance, yes, had helped them improve, because now, of course, the CIOs have a nice report saying you are compliant to compliance Starbucks. etc. And yet the CISOs strongly disagree, because a lot of them actually know better and saying, well, yeah, I've got a tick mark to say X, Y, and Z, however, I'm still facing all these same problems on my core network. I tend to talk a bit faster, please wave your hand if you're going a bit quick. Who uses this formula for calculating the risks on a network? No one dares put their hand up. Good. Because how can we possibly know all the threats that are out there? How can we possibly know all the vulnerabilities that they haven't been discovered yet? And yet people will quite often, one of my old bosses, they wanted me to draw up a risk matrix of every threat posed to us in the network. I'm like, get somebody else to do that job, I'm not interested. I need to look at the network and see what's actually happening, not formulate a plan of what possibly could happen. Okay, so, just working on metrics and doing this kind of thing isn't going to help you. This is actually a post onto an AV forum by this guy, and he's asking the AV vendor, does the signature team actually do Zeus ZBot configuration files? Because I keep sending you all these .bin files every week, and yet your AV is still not detecting all of these old ones that I found. So, Tom knows what he's talking about. Unfortunately, the AV vendors struggle. You look at any of the stats coming out from people like Symantec, they wrote more AV signatures last year than they've written in the previous X number of years combined, is the quote that I keep reading. And they simply can't keep up. So if it's taken them 2, 3, 4 days, or whatever that window may be, to develop a signature for a latest attack, that's your at least minimum exposure window. Probably a great deal longer than that. So, is this the end, or is it the start of a new beginning? What can we do about this? How do we change? So we all have careers, we need to protect them, obviously. That's why we're in the security business. So what would you rather do? Carry on with the status quo, watching all your dollars flood out the network and just continuing to find worms and outbreaks within the network, wondering what's really happening? Or do you want to get your act together, hire a really good hardcore security team who know what they're doing, and they're aware of everything that's happening on your network? And that's the way people really need to go. You need 24/7 situational awareness. It's a term I'm seeing quite a bit more of recently. Cybersecurity situational awareness, taking live threat intelligence from the wider community, people like yourselves, and actually applying that to the traffic on your network and looking through everything that's happening. Looking at network forensics, no longer looking at log files, no longer looking at net flow, but recording entire sessions, looking at those conversations, who's talking to who, why am I seeing any traffic from my network going to country X? That's of interest to me. And then within that traffic, why am I seeing these types of documents? Why am I seeing non-standard protocols across this port? This slide sucks. Time for a case study. So who here is aware of the Zeus or variants of Zeus botnet? Everybody else? Okay, you should all be aware of it. Okay, this is prevalent. It's just a framework that people can use to create botnets. It's a massive problem out there at the moment. Many different variants. People are just using this just as a framework to develop their own kits, to deploy, go and take control of a load of hosts, and then actually infiltrate organizations. But we're seeing variants of Zeus which are targeted at specific organizations. So specific variants of Zeus just going after government organizations, variants of it going after banking organizations, and the way it's being configured, even integrating other exploit kits to do certain things. So primarily you see a lot of this in the banking world, trying to steal people's credentials, but also we're seeing it used in government attacks as well, to try and steal intellectual property or government secrets. Who here gets spam? Everybody? Okay. And of course you never click on it, you never follow those links, it's just delete, whatever. But what happens if you get an email coming from one of your work colleagues? Okay. This is an example of a spear phishing attack within a US government organisation. And just as a very initial look at it, it looks pretty convincing. It's got tear lines, classification in the right place, etc. There's a few grammatical errors, but maybe some people may miss that. And the title of the actual email was pretty unconvincing as well. Nuclear missile attack on Japan. It's like, you're going to go, yeah, spam. But what happens if this was actually inserted into an email thread that you've been part of? So your email's going backwards and forwards between you and a colleague, and all of a sudden you get a response from him, and there's a link in there, and you just click on that link without even thinking. And that's what these attackers are actually doing. They're infiltrating the network, getting a foothold, and then they're jumping into an email thread and sending an email from one of your colleagues possibly, and without even thinking you're going to go and click on that link. So as unconvincing as this attack may be, as we see when we go a bit further on, it still worked in a government agency where people should know better. But maybe it will protect me, okay? Maybe not. So we've actually captured one of these Zeus variants, taken that binary file, uploaded it to Virus Total, run a scan, and this is who detected it. Now, okay, because these things are changing and morphing so rapidly, these antivirus vendors and IDS vendors, etc., just can't keep up, they keep saying. So, you know, here's all of these vendors that fail to detect this bad binary file. And as soon as that machine, machine is compromised, the first thing that binary is going to do is actually overwrite the host config file to stop that AV from ever updating. So now you've actually been compromised. Your machine can sit there doing AV scans once a week, and everything looks fine, and yet the backdoor's already in there, and it's never going to be detected because it's no longer updating. Any of you have run AV systems for enterprise, you all know how many machines fail to update on a regular basis. Why aren't they updating? Maybe this file's already been overwritten. What we can see on the right here is just looking at some analysis of the traffic in Investigator, where we're actually seeing all the metadata that's being extracted. So we can then automate that process to alert you when we're seeing that kind of file being downloaded going forward. Again, now looking at the metadata that I've actually extracted from those sessions, taking a closer look, we can see the Zeus configuration file download, and again we can automate that, look for specific types of file. So rather than looking for signatures triggering on a known exploit, what you should be looking for is, I want to know about every inbound email which contains a PDF file, which contains executable script. Show me every inbound session where there's been an executable file downloaded, where that executable file has been obfuscated. These are things I'm interested in. And show me every exe file that's come from this list of countries. So you're looking for attack vectors rather than specific attacks. So now we've got this information, we've decided, yeah, there's something there of interest. I want to know everything that happened from that compromised machine. So I don't want to look at just log files, okay? This is going out across 480, it's not even logged anywhere most of the time. Here we can see all the files that have been uploaded from that host. We can see the destination IP address, we can plot it, and if we want to, we can actually pull back that data and recreate any of those sessions, recreate the documents that have actually left the network. So earlier on in William's speech, somebody mentioned about proof. How do you actually know what data left your network if there was a compromise? Here's the proof. Now I know that yes, the compromise took place, and here's all the information which left my network. Okay, there's your smoking gun, but also the videotape of what happened. And that's what's really cool. Now I can go and disclose this because we're in deep trouble. But also from this, a matter of interest, we set this up as a honeypot and clicked on that link, infected the machine. We've actually captured the destination of where this botnet controller is. We've also got the username and password. We can actually go and log into it and see. Let's have a look what other data is on there. So now we're logging onto this malicious server. It's actually in Minsk. We can actually see all the directories. These are all different people's machines which have been compromised and then uploaded data to those systems. And actually when we went through these, we found government documents from that agency that received a phishing scam, so people did go and click on that link. So now security is starting to suffer a little bit less. Okay? Now we've got the tools to understand what's really happening on the network. We're no longer flying blind. We're no longer looking at IDS alerts and saying, what happened next? Was this compromised or not? We've got the absolute proof, yes, this machine was compromised. Here's the beacon traffic going out. Here's all the documents that were uploaded. This is where they went, and look who else is beacon. I can then do a very quick search and say, show me everybody else who's actually visited that IP address. Show me everywhere that IP address has existed in my network. This is just showing you the actual timeline of this traffic beaconing out. Note, port 80, standard allowed traffic from the network. So this kind of thing, undetected. This is a compromised system, actually just beaconing out asking for updates across standard channels. Sometimes encrypted. We've seen a lot of that as well, where people using self-signed certs and actually encrypting the tunnels back out of the network, reverse connect proxies, etc. Very, very difficult to detect using existing technologies. So in terms of the network security socometer, where do these technologies sit? So a lot of these things have not changed in the last, like I said, 10, 15 years. Firewalls, IDS, AV, still rely on the same type of detection methods. Yes, they may have heuristics, etc. Whoopie-doo, it's still not working. Firewalls, UTM devices, again, just log-based, even if they're application aware, they're still missing these advanced attacks. Hence why these big name enterprises are getting compromised. And they give you very little information. So, I've sat there in front of X billion IDS alerts, firewalls, even all correlated through a nice interface, and give me a console. All I've got at the end of the day is more logs, they're just in one place. They don't tell me what really happened. NetFlow, that can give you a little bit more information. It tends to work well at the kind of ISP level where you've got very large router infrastructure you can take all this flow data from. But yet again, once you get that flow data and you understand what's happening, now I need to actually see the packets. I need to see all the packets, not just a sample of the packets. DLP, anybody here got experience with DLP solutions? Does it work? Yeah. Most people have deployed DLP and not put it in blocking mode, they're just in detection mode. So what's the point? You have to specify what protocols you want to look for, specify what documents you want to look for, or what portions of a document. I don't think I could go and index all of the Word documents on my laptop, let alone across an entire enterprise and specify what's critical to me. It's almost an impossible task before you even start. SIMs, useful to actually just make some sense of the huge amount of data that you may have, but again, garbage in, garbage out. You're just taking in log files, it's not really a lot of use. You need far more context around that. So that's where real-time network forensics comes in. Okay? Record everything that's going across your network, store it to disk, index it, and have the ability to very quickly search through that vast quantity of data. And anybody who says storage is a problem, you're crazy. So security doesn't have to suck. Like I'm saying, full packet capture, record everything that's going across the network. That's the only place where you're going to find the answers to these really difficult problems. Okay? Was I compromised? Yes or no? Go and look through that data and find out what information left my network. Go and look. Okay? And that's it from me. So security doesn't have to suck. Okay? Sometimes you just need to look at it from a slightly different way and a new mindset. So that's what I did when I was at the last role at Symantec. I was going down this route of having the entire Symantec product suite at my disposal, going to deploy IDS, SIMs, AV until your heart's content. But trying to make some sense of all that information and actually get everything working together to get this high-level dashboard, it all came to nothing because someone's still going to come along and just drive the truck straight through it and you'll be blind to what's going on. Any questions? No difficult ones from the rowdy group at the back.